So I'm what you call a Dina enjoyer because I like Golgari Aristocrats, but we are not talking about Dina Soul Steeper today. Nope, today we are going to be talking about Zimone and Dina, the Landfall Aristocrat combination of both of these cards. Now, I love Zimone. She's gotten a lot of love in recent sets, but I also love Dina, and Dina doesn't get a whole lot of love in recent sets. It makes me really, really sad, but I am happy we got Zimone and Dina here, so let's go ahead and talk about what these guys do. Zimone and Dina is a Sultai commander that has power 3 and toughness 4. Whenever we draw our second card each turn, target opponent loses 2 life, and then we gain 2 life. We can also sacrifice another creature to draw a card and then put any land from our hand onto the battlefield tapped. If we have 8 or more lands, we will repeat this process once. That is, of course, a reference to both Zimone's ability and Dina's ability, since Dina allows you to burn people and Zimone allows you to get free draws and ramp. So what's the strategy gonna be here? Well, let's go ahead and make sure we have the best things Landfall can give us and the best things Aristocrats can give us. Aristocrats can give us burn and Landfall can give us tokens. So let's talk about that Aristocrat package first. We are going to be running 8 Aristocrat cards, and obviously these are not the best ones available. These are just the ones that work at our budget. We are technically $1 over the $15 budget, so we are going to be calling this a $16 deck. But let's begin with, of course, Dina Soul Steeper. Anytime we gain life, like say off of Zimone and Dina, every opponent burns for 1. We also have a sack outlet on top of that ability as well. Marauding Blight Priest does the same thing. When we gain life, every opponent burns for 1. Then we have Varan Executioner Thane. Anytime one or more of our creatures die, all of our opponents burn for 2 and we gain 2, but only once per turn. Bastion Remembrance allows us to make a token, and then anytime a creature we control dies, every opponent burns for 1 and we gain 1. Vindictive Vampire does the same thing without the token. Vengeful Blood Witch says when this creature or another creature we control dies, target opponent loses 1 life and we gain 1 life. And Blood Artist does that for any time any creature on the board gets thrown away at all. Then we have Poison Tip Archer, which will burn every opponent for 1, but it will not gain us any life on top of that. These cards together will form the basis of our win condition. Our goal is to burn our opponents out very, very heavily, but we do still need to make lots and lots of tokens to make this work, so let's go ahead and talk about our token production. We're going to be leaning on Landfall for a decent bit of this, so Zendikar's Royal, Sporemount, and Elfsworn Giant all will generate us tons of tokens when we play lands. When things die, Ghoulish Procession, Curse of Reckless Dead, and Ogre Slumlord will produce tokens for us after death, and by us drawing cards with our commander's abilities, Mischievous Mystic will make us Blue Fairy tokens, and Detective of the Month will make us tokens as long as we have 10 or more permanents on the board first. Finally, we have a sack outlet and token producer in Izani Thousand-Eyed, which allows us to have a ton of black and green insects based on the amount of creatures in our graveyard when we play Izani. Now, while our commander has the ability to sacrifice cards, we do want more of those abilities in the deck as well. So let's go ahead and add in some sack outlets like Witch Cauldron and Vampiric Rites, which both allow us to sack creatures to draw cards by paying 2 mana. Then we have the free sacrifices from Phyrexian Ghoul and Bloodflow Connoisseur, and then we have Sivirus, which allows us to sack a creature to mill 3 cards. And then for every opponent, we will choose one of the cards we milled and say, this one's assigned to you. Do you want me to have this card? If they say yes, we put the card in our hand. If they say no, then they burn for 3 life. The idea is eventually this card will basically say, sack a creature, draw 3 cards, as our opponents will have less and less life to parlay with as the game goes on. But because we are going to be throwing lots of cards in the graveyard, let's also have a reanimation engine to build off of as well. Altar of Baal lets us get rid of tokens to reanimate any creature from our grave. That of Rebirth lets us reanimate anything so long as it has seen 4 creatures or artifacts die. Quest for the Necropolis will allow us to reanimate creatures as long as we've landfalled enough for it to see lots of creatures die. Victimize sacks a creature to get 2 creatures out of up our graveyard, and Dread Return lets us get a creature from our grave, and then we can sack creatures to use its ability once more. Finally, we have a Reassembling Skeleton, as this thing can be used as you upgrade the deck for infinite combos, but it can also be used in this version of the deck as an easy access sack body for our commander. And that does it for the deck's core strategy. We want to have lots of free creatures out, we want to reanimate good creatures, we want tokens on the board, and we want their deaths to burn our opponents for itty bits of damage until they die to deaths of 1,000 cuts. That is what Aristocrat decks do. But that all said, we do still need to talk about the other things the deck is doing, and one of those things is, well, drawing cards. So obviously our primary draw engine is going to be from our commander, and then of course we have supplementary draw engines like what Sivris is doing and like what our Witch's Cauldron is doing along with Vampiric Rites. But we need more ways to draw cards than just these. So let's go ahead and combine Draw and Landfall with Eureka Moment to draw 2 and drop a land onto the battlefield, Tatyova to draw cards every time we drop a land on the battlefield, and then let's turn the sacrificing side of the deck into a draw engine as well, with Morbid Opportunist, Moldavine Reclamation, and Death Reap Ritual. All of these will draw us cards as our creatures die, but in the case of Morbid Opportunist and Death Reap Ritual, these will draw cards when our opponent's creatures die as well, making them a little more powerful in my book, even if they are a bit slower. Finally, let's add an Obsessive Stitcher to the deck, as it will not only loot through our deck for us, but it can also be used to reanimate creatures for us as well. And remember, all you have to do to trigger our commander's ability is draw 1 extra card that will burn our opponents for 2 and allow us to gain life, so we can just use the Obsessive Stitcher on any time it is our turn to get that second draw, even if we are not in a position to get other benefits on top of it. That's it for the draw engine. We're only really running 6 because our commander and other areas of the deck are dedicated so hard to just getting through the deck anyway. That said, let's go ahead and talk about our next section, which is removing things from our opponent's love life. I mean, their decks, their boards, removing their cards, not their loved ones. We're going to be running an 11-card removal and interaction package with a couple of board wipes on top of it. We are running a single solitary counterspell right now, and that is Negate. We don't have much room for much more because we are basically gluing 2 deck types together. After this, let's make sure we have a Force Everybody to Sack series of cards. Plaguecrafter, Demon's Disciple, Merciless Executioner, and Accursed Marauder can force all of our opponents to sacrifice their best creatures on their boards. Then we have Savra, Queen of the Golgari, and Butcher of Malakir, which say when we sacrifice creatures, our opponents have to sacrifice creatures alongside us. Then let's get rid of any type of non-land permanent we don't like with Mortality Spear, and of course, if we've gained life, this costs less mana as well. Then let's combine removal and landfall with Death Sprout and Binding the Old Gods, as both of these get rid of problematic permanents from the board, and then search our library for lands, which benefits both of our sides of our commander. Then finally, let's add an Eldest Reborn, as this not only forces all of our opponents to sacrifice a creature or a planeswalker, but it then, later in the game, will also reanimate anything we want. As for board wipes, let's run a Gaze of Granite and an Oblivion Stone for, well, the same reason on both of them. Let's get rid of all non-land permanents on the board completely. Let's reset everybody back to 0 and then show why we, as the graveyard deck, don't give a shit that we lost all of our best cards. And, well, that does it for all of our removal. Now all that's left to do is to talk about how we're going to be playing with lands in the half landfall deck. We're going to be running an 11-card ramp package, and once more, I would like to run more, but we are gluing 2 deck types together, so I don't really have that ability. So let's go ahead and talk about each of these in turn. Explore, Coiling Oracle, and Growth Spiral all basically let us draw a card and then drop a land onto the battlefield. The Coiling Oracle, not exactly the effect it does. It pulls us up a card, and if it's a land, it drops it down, and if it's not, we draw it. But it does have the ability of being a creature, which means we can sacrifice it to our commander afterwards. Then we have Elvish Rejuvenator and Clifftop Lookout, which let us go through the top cards of our deck, hit a land, and throw it onto the battlefield. Kura's Follower can be used to untap any permanent, which we can use to untap our commander if we need to, or untap lands if we need to ramp. Search for Tomorrow can grab any basic land from our deck, as can Spring Bloom Druid, but again, then Spring Bloom's Druid allows us to have a creature which we can sacrifice, which is also fantastic. Wood Elves grabs us a forest out of the deck, so we can get dual lands with this girl. And then we have Solemn Simulacrum, which grabs us a basic land and then can be sacked to draw us a card. Finally, we have Zimone Quandrix Prodigy, giving us access to more draw power and also the ability to freely drop extra lands onto the battlefield. After that, we are only looking at lands. We are going to be running 6 islands, 8 swamps, and 10 forests, as we need to hit our green ramp as fast as possible. And we aren't going to be running too many dual lands because we want to be able to search our library for lots and lots of basic lands. So we are running the searchable lands of Tangled Islet, Haunted Mire, and Sunken Hollow. These are great because the 2 that come into play tapped do have the forest typing. Wood Elves can grab them, and the Sunken Hollow, while it doesn't have forest typing, does have the ability to come into play untapped. Then we have the bounce lands of Dimir Aqueduct, Simic Growth Chamber, and the Golgari Rot Farm. Each of these gives us the ability to extend what our deck is doing landfall-wise very, very well. Then we've got a high amount of fetching lands because we want to get lots and lots of landfall triggers in this deck. Blighted Woodland and Nereid Landscape grab us 2 lands out of the deck, but Escape Tunnel, Shire Terrace, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, Promising Vein, and Foreboding Landscape all fetch us out a single basic land out of the deck for various costs, with Foreboding Landscape being the strongest of all of these. Then we've got our Omni lands of Command Tower and Exotic Orchard with a single utility land, Grim Backwoods, though obviously as you're upgrading the deck, cards like the Jukabog can be used in this deck as well. And that does it for all the lands. We really are very straightforward since we want to run so many basic lands. But that said, all that's left to do is talk about how to actually play this deck. So let's go ahead and get into that. In an ideal world, we'd have a ramp piece we can drop on turn 2, but since we don't have that with this hand, I think we'll go ahead and work with what we've got. We've got 4 lands and a sad robot, which gives us access to a very particular play that I want to mess with. So let's draw our opening card. It's a Bastion of Remembrance. We'll play a Haunted Mire past our opponents. We move to turn 2, we have a quest for the Necropolis, so let's go ahead and play a Swamp, tap it, there's the quest, and then we pass turn to our opponent. Moving on to turn 3, we get to play an island down and then tap 3 to get our commander on the board. Our quest now sees that there has been 1 land down, so it's going to cost less to use its ability. We move into turn 4, we have an island available, we play an island, the quest now has 2 quest counters on it, and then let's go ahead and tap out to play Sad Robot, tap Zimone, sack the Sad Robot, go into our library and get a land, and then draw a card. And then, of course, after doing that, Zimone will drop another land onto the battlefield, meaning that 2 more counters get to be seen by the quest for the Necropolis. Now we move into turn 5, and we play another Swamp. The quest has seen 5 cards. Now we can sacrifice the quest and put a creature onto the battlefield very, very cheaply. So let's go ahead and start things out. We want to keep 2 mana open to use Negate, so we're going to pay 1, 2, 3. Let's go ahead and get Bastion of Remembrance out there now. Now we get our token out with it. So boom, here's our little 1/1 human soldier. And now we pay 1 to sack the quest for the Necropolis to get the Sad Robot out. And the Sad Robot, of course, lets us go into our library and get another land onto the battlefield. Boom, that is out. Now we can tap Zimone and Dina to sack the Sad Robot to draw 2 cards, and we'd be able to play another land, but we don't really have one. So let's go ahead and pay 1 and put a Vat of Rebirth on the board. Now we are set up very well. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, we have 8 lands. Sorry, that means we get to draw 1 extra card whenever we do that. Sweet. We are all set up for everything we need to do throughout the rest of the game now. Now we move into turn 6. Let's go ahead. Let's assume that we had to use Negate on the last turn to protect our board. Let's go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3. Morbid Opportunist goes onto the board, and let's pay 1, 2, 3. Demon's Disciple gets played. Everybody loses a creature, and that lets us put a counter onto the Vat of Rebirth. Then we get to draw a card with the Morbid Opportunist. That also is the second card we've drawn, so Zimone and Dina does its thing. Let's go ahead and pass turn to an opponent. Then we'll tap Zimone and Dina on an opponent's turn, sacrifice the human soldier to draw 1 card for Zimone and Dina, 1 card for Morbid Opportunist, play 2 lands with Zimone and Dina, and draw an extra card with Zimone and Dina, letting us have an extra counter onto the Vat of Rebirth. Then when our turn comes up, we have Savra. Savra is a fantastic grab right now. Let's go ahead and tap 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Ogre Slumlord comes out. When creatures die, we get to make tokens, and we get to pay 1, 2, 3, 4. Play Savra onto the board. Now, if we tap Zimone and Dina, we can sacrifice, say, our Morbid Opportunist to draw 1, 2, 3, and drop 2 lands onto the battlefield. That allows our Vat of Rebirth to get power. That allows us to make ourselves a rat token, and Savra sacks a creature from every opponent's board state. And remember, every time we do this, our opponents are burning for damage from the Bastion of Remembrance. Now, when we move into our next turn, we have an Oblivion Stone. We don't really need that right now. I think the correct thing to do right now is get rid of the rat token. I think what we do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's get Butcher of Malakir out. Now when we get rid of our tokens, our opponents are losing 2 creatures every single time. Tap the Zimone and Dina, sacrifice the rat, get an extra counter onto the Vat of Rebirth, draw 2, play 2 lands. We don't have the lands. We'll go ahead and tap 1, 2, 3, use the Vat of Rebirth, get the Morbid Opportunist back out of the graveyard. Now we are set to draw cards more often throughout the game. Now let's go ahead and pay 2, and we're going to put Ghoulish Procession on the board. Now, as our opponents lose creatures, we will generate black zombie creature tokens as well. And we can assume that during one of our opponent's turns that we get a zombie from one of them, as well as a rat at the very least from one of our other opponents. Which means when our turn comes up, we get to go ahead and burn our opponents out hard. Let's go ahead and pay 1, 2, 3, Marauding Blight Priest. Now every time we gain life, our opponents burn for 1. Whenever our opponents see a creature die, they burn for 1 and we gain 1, so they're at least taking 3 damage. And if Zimone and Dina is the one that triggers the ability, then they're going to be taking 5 damage, 6 damage, because it's going to deal 2, gain 2, Marauding Blight Priest will see it, and it will do even more after that. That'll let us sacrifice 1 of these tokens to draw 1, 2, 3 because of Zimone and Dina. And then we have Moldervine Reclamation. We can now do 5, put the Moldervine out, and we can pay 1, 2, 3, and put Blood Flow Connoisseur out. Now, every time we sack creatures, not only do we get to add counters to the Vat of Rebirth, we get to sack, draw 2, or just draw the 1 rather, because of what our Zimone and Dina had already done and Morbid Opportunist had already done. Now every time we sack creatures, we gain a life. Everybody is losing a life from the Marauding Blight Priest. Everybody's losing life from the Bastion of Remembrance. And if somebody threatens us with a bad time, we just say, okay, that's fine. Bloodflow Connoisseur, sack this, you lose 2 creatures. Sack the creature that came back from that because of the Ghoulish Possession and the Ogre Slumlord, you lose 6 creatures. Sacrifice the Morbid Opportunist, you lose 2 creatures. Sacrifice the 2 tokens that came out of that, you lose 6 creatures. We can hurt our opponents by getting rid of 12 creatures at a time using the Bloodflow Connoisseur. Because we have Savra and we have Butcher of Malakir. We basically have completely controlled the board state for creatures, and we have a hand that is filled to the brim, so we can just respond if we need to. And if our opponents build a board state that does not include creatures, it's mostly like planeswalkers and shit, then we'll just play an Oblivion Stone, crack it, blow up everything, and rebuild. Who cares at that point? Jesus. And with that said, that is how to play the deck. It's a very straightforward Aristocrat deck. Just understand that when you're playing Aristocrats, you do have to keep track of a lot of different triggers. But if you wanted to up the power of the deck, which you can, let's talk about what that would look like. As you're upgrading the deck, better ramp pieces are available to you at higher budgets, Sakura Tribe Elder being a prime example of this, as it can sacrifice itself, triggering all of your Aristocrat stuff, while also getting you a land. Better Aristocrats are also available to you because the biggest one of all of the Aristocrats is Zulaport Cutthroat. This is fantastic, but it is a bit out of this deck's budget. Then you have a second copy of your commander, effectively, with Gixie and Puppeteer. Your second card drawn makes every opponent burn for 2, and then you gain 2. And then, of course, if it dies, we can reanimate things, which is great. Let's also supplement token production by adding in an Ophiomancer and a Jadar Ghoulcaller of Nephalia. We can also combine these sacrificing and landfall strategies even further with White of the Reliquary, letting us sack creatures in order to play lands. We can also make sure that our lands are generating tokens with Field of the Dead. A lot of money to drop this into the deck, but it is fantastic. We can also turn Landfall into burn at a very good rate with Iridescent Vine Lasher, and we can even put an alternate win con in with Avenger of Zendikar. Use these tokens for combat or use these tokens to kill people with sacrificing. Either way, it's a fantastic card, especially when you're reanimating it. Then we can have 2 more big top ends in Omnixius the Fallen, letting us get access to more landfall equals burn, and Bolus's Citadel if you want to put a game changer in the deck, letting us look at the top card of our library and play it by paying life, which of course we gain a lot of life in this deck, so it's very easy to make use of this card. And that does it for everything in the deck. Hopefully you enjoyed this deck tech. I love Landfall decks and I love Aristocrat decks, so the ability to combine both of them with Zimone and Dina does bring me a decent bit of joy, I'm not gonna lie. That all said, if you haven't already, please consider following me over on Blue Sky, subscribing to this channel if you have not decided to do so already, or maybe consider checking out my Patreon and supporting me over there. Most of what you get there is just a little bit of behind-the-scene conversation of what's going on in all of my channels, but I do appreciate the help nonetheless, and hey, if you guys want, I may start doing deck upgrades or deck techs for people who are patrons specifically, since, well, every other Magic content creator seems to do that already, so why not go ahead and ape a good idea. There's also the channel playmat available if you have not already purchased one. And if you want to check out my live stream over on Twitch and YouTube, then please consider doing that as well. That all said, thank you so much for watching my video. Thank you for getting me as close as I have gotten to 10,000 subscribers. I can't wait to pass that particular threshold. That all said, thank you for being here, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, thanks for making it to the end of the video. I really could not do any of this without all of you. Those of you watching, and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. I wanted to go ahead and take a minute to thank all of you who do that, because with YouTube being what it is these days, I really cannot do this full time without the support from each and every one of you. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Tales of Atonement, Nixie Chan, Kiri Artemis, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. Thank you so very much. But since you're here, why not go ahead and try watching another one? There should be one that's on the screen right now. And if you are a patron of mine, I wanted to go ahead and thank you again for all of your support. There is still a video you could press though, if you'd like. I would appreciate it just a little bit.